Is pressure cooking a healthy way to cook food? This is a huge question that stops up a lot of people, and it held me up from using my pressure cooker for years, okay? This stovetop pressure cooker we got for our wedding. We registered for this for one reason only, because one of my husband's favorite meals, his mother made in a pressure cooker. I don't have a pressure cooker, I can't make his favorite meal, we need a pressure cooker. Right, so it's like a $70 item for one meal, which is pretty funny, because you can totally make that meal, pepper steak, found on the blog, without a pressure cooker, but I didn't know anything about cooking, and so if it was in the recipe, I needed this appliance. I made that one dish in the pressure cooker. I just started getting into making some more things in it as I started learning to cook better, and then I read Nourishing Traditions. And Nourishing Traditions said that pressure cooking was not healthy, and that the high heat and pressure damaged the nutrients in food, and I was like, drat! So, the pressure cooker got no use. I put it away, and I treated it as I treat my microwave, as a newfangled thing that's not going to be healthy and good for my family. And then, as the years started passing, people started doing more research, and I'm so grateful to bloggers like Kristen at Food Renegade and Katie at Wellness Mama, Wordy at Traditional Cooking School. All of them started digging into the research and said, you know what? This is crazy, because the heat that these items get up to, whether it's a stovetop pressure cooker or an electric pressure cooker, the heat's only about 250 max. And when you think about cooking on a grill, cooking in the oven, even sauteing, and making pancakes, you know, if you've ever made pancakes on an electric griddle, you use 350. We cook over 250 all the time, and we don't worry at all about how it's affecting our food. And so to say that that high heat is affecting our food is just simply a misnomer. It's a fear tactic. Now, the high pressure, right? Is the high pressure going to affect the food? Well, first of all, the pressure is only slightly different. It's the difference of like climbing up into the mountains versus being at sea level. And I'm not hearing anyone say that, oh, we should all go cook in the mountains because there's less pressure there, the water boils at a lower temperature, and your food is going to be healthier. It's not really. The pressure, the only thing the pressure does is allow the water to boil at a higher temperature, makes the food cook faster because it's hotter. But not because it's too hot, not dangerously hot, you know what I mean? So all of those were really just kind of like, I think, knee-jerk reactions without research behind them saying that, oh, high heat, high pressure, these have to be bad things. Now, what the research actually shows is to the contrary. It does not show that pressure cooking loses nutrients. There have been a number of studies done over the last couple decades, actually, that prove exactly the opposite. And I want to make sure I get these numbers right. So some of the studies showed that things like boiling, roasting, and steaming showed like a 60% loss in nutrients, particularly boiling. So boiling is probably the worst. It tends to take a long time. There's a lot of water involved. A lot of the nutrients can leach out into the water. So boiling has like a 60% nutrient loss. Roasting and steaming, depending on the situation, can have between a 10 and a 50% nutrient loss. 10 is great. 50, not so much. The pressure cooker nutrient retention is about 90 to 95%, which again is only a 5 to 10% loss. So in all of those standard ways of cooking food, the pressure cooker is actually the winner. And it kind of makes sense, because the reasons that food sometimes loses nutrients, or that nutrients are damaged in cooking, is number one, liquid. If it's immersed, if the food is immersed in liquid, a lot of the nutrients, surface area wise, can leach out of the food into the liquid. In the pressure cooker, sometimes you only need a cup of water. So there's not a lot of actual immersion always in a pressure cooker to leach the nutrients out. And then another factor in leaching nutrients is time, right? The longer you cook something, and this is very clearly seen if you're steaming or boiling a vegetable, right? The longer a vegetable is steamed or boiled, the less bright green or brightly colored it gets, the more kind of mushy and bendable it gets. So you can literally see and feel the fiber and some of the nutrients leaving, right? And the darker the water gets, if you're making stock, or even if you're steaming vegetables, if you steam broccoli, you pour off that water and it's green. It's like a transfer has happened. It's very clear, even to a non-research based eye, right? So because the pressure cookers can cook food faster, there's simply less time for the nutrients to leach out, which is pretty cool. And it uses less water. Also, there's less evaporation, right? Everything is trapped inside. That's the whole point of the steam and the pressure cooking. So there's really nowhere for the nutrients to go. Even if it does come out into the water, some people will say that as long as it makes sense, try to use the water that you've cooked with in your meal. For some foods, that's not a good thing. Foods that have anti-nutrients like your greens, some cruciferous vegetables like broccoli, cauliflower, and cabbage, those can actually, some bad things like goitrogens and oxalates can be in those vegetables, come out into the water, so it's good, right? Get the bad things out, so don't use water on things like greens and cruciferous vegetables. But for other things, like meats and some basic vegetables, other vegetables, you know, feel free to just use the water, and then you can feel like you're getting that 5 to 10% of nutrients back. And then, you know, a lot of people say that if it's not a traditional way of cooking, I don't want to use it. It hasn't been used for, you know, hundreds and thousands of years. And that's really been my benchmark question too when I decide what's healthy. But if you think about thousands of years ago, how people started cooking, it was over a fire. And so we could say, well, we must cook everything over a fire then. But we've since learned that those nice, you know, grill marks, the char marks that a grill makes on our meat or our vegetables actually can have carcinogens in them, cancer-causing compounds, because it's burnt food, you know, and burning is not really that good. So the be-all, end-all question can't be, has it always been done, right? It just doesn't quite work that way. It's not as black and white as even I used to think it is. So there are probably a lot more, you know, problematic things happening if you're going to grill a steak than if you pressure cook a roast. One other point that's really pretty cool about pressure cookers is that studies are showing that it actually reduces some anti-nutrients like phytates and lectins more than other ways of cooking. So anti-nutrients mean it's something in usually a grain or a legume that prevents our body from digesting and assimilating all the nutrients available as well as possible, right? So we talk about this when we talk about things like soaking grains and soaking beans. When you soak, you know, your beans, your dry beans overnight, it's supposed to start to break down those anti-nutrients because the seed is kind of getting ready to grow, okay? And it's saying, great, I'm not going to be eaten. I can let my guard down and get ready to grow. And we're like, heh, going to eat you anyway. Now that your guard is down, I can assimilate more of those nutrients. As it turns out, pressure cooking really actually does about the same thing. It doesn't mean you shouldn't soak your beans, okay? But it does mean that cooking beans on the stovetop for a couple hours ends up with more anti-nutrients than pressure cooking the same dry beans for 35 minutes. Soaking the beans and then pressure cooking them is the best possible, you know, action that gets rid of the most anti-nutrients. So it's really pretty cool that pressure cooking turns out research-based wise to get rid of some of the things that we want to get rid of anyway. So even though it's not strictly traditional, it's still a very healthy way and a much faster way, especially for our fast-moving society, to get things done and get real food on your table. It's definitely healthier than calling out for takeout because you forgot to plan dinner.